independent journalism may not be that independent after all, even when they enter the creator economy. And here's why. Journalists make real money now, especially thanks to platforms like Substack, Beehive, and many other creator economy tools. We're not talking about small numbers. Obviously, someone like Letters from an American is an outlier with about estimated $5 million of annual revenue, but you can go down the list and probably at least a third, if not half, of these different newsletters are actually issued by journalists who used to work for mass media, legacy media, and now went independent and have their own kind of like island to call home, out of which they continue to produce interesting content. Why is this a problem? Well, whenever you deal with large amounts of money that you can make independently, people will only let you be independent for that long because you have the most valuable currency out of all that we currently have in the world, the attention. You have the attention of millions of people who are willing to go and pay you every month for your content, which means that they really trust your opinion, which means anyone who would want to influence those people would love to get in bed with you and figure out the way that you can, maybe tailor, shape up, or at least like nudge your messaging in that kind of direction. I'm not accusing anyone of doing anything, but that's the reality of things. Anytime someone who has a lot of attention gets to the scale where they can influence certain decisions in public, right? Influence public basically to make certain decisions, you become important to certain individuals who want influence those individuals. Primarily, it usually translates into something like people want to do brand deals with you because you have the attention, they want to make sure you influence the purchasing decisions of those individuals. But I actually want to talk about a little bit of a different kind of impact. To illustrate my point, I want to give you two examples of individuals who both used to work in mass media, legacy brand, went independent, and decided to do something different with how and what kind of ideas they communicate. First on the docket is Alex Conrad, who used to work for Forbes, essentially author of 30 for 30, author of Midas Touch that covered a lot of VCs, individual who wrote a lot of high-profile front page articles for Forbes. He decided to go independent. He created a brand called Upstarts Media, and essentially he actually focuses now on the more slower VC backed companies that are essentially promising something interesting and exciting in their space. His whole value proposition was that Forbes would limit him when it comes to the kind of companies he can cover, because obviously they wanted to cover only the most shiniest, sexiest brands that everyone's going to want to click on and read the article, where he saw an opportunity to cover brands that are doing a lot of interesting things that should get the attention but do not currently because of editorial limitation. So he went independent. He created this, publication, and I love it. Honestly, I'm biased here. I met Alex in person. I spoke with him a bunch about this. I'm very active kind of like within that community. I love it because it offers something new and unique. And this is the kind of example that I always celebrate. And you see on my shorts, set of videos that I actually celebrate quite a lot. Individuals who are like him, journalists who went independent, had something interesting to tell, and they're telling that story. And now there are people who are supporting them both with the attention and financially. And then you have someone like Barry Weiss. And again, we'll try to leave politics out of this as much as possible. But long story short about her is that she had a very similar story. She used to work for a major publication. She didn't like how they were treating the kind of content she wanted to talk about. She went independent, created the free press, grew it to, again, very large publication with millions of dollars in recurring revenue from the subscriptions. The kind of content she would cover, in my opinion, was very questionable. Questionably researched articles, questionable statements, all kind of like a lot of things that are, covered under the veil of, I'm an independent writer, but really a lot of talking points match very much, right-wing politics talking points. Not an issue for me, but I just like people who cut it straight and shoot kind of like straight when it comes to the content. Here it was very clearly done in a very specific way to address a certain type of audience. The thing is that in both of these cases, you have prominent individuals who are very smart, who are creating interesting content, for their type of audience, right? Albeit in one case, I'm very much in a bullseye for that kind of content, and the other one I'm not. But the thing is that coming back to my point about the importance of those individuals, when they're in front of the right people, when they have the attention of those individuals coming from the creator economy, they get interested parties going and trying to pursue them to work through certain new projects. And in Barry Weiss's case, she became actually an editor-in-chief of CBS News. Long story short, CBS News was part of the acquisition. They essentially got all rolled up together with Paramount in the Skydance Corporation. Now, there's a lot of conversations around the fact that this conglomerate now has certain ideas of how they want to communicate the content that they talk about, how they want to cover certain types of topics, and they very much match what Barry Weiss used to do. That's why she's a very fitting persona. But again, removing politics aside, the reason why I want to bring it up is that this is where you see how there is a certain angle of messaging that, say, a major corporation wants to deliver, and they find a certain individual who has the attention of the voice of the audience that listens to their voice, and they're interested in the kind of content, and they're moldable enough to receive that kind of information. So that creator gets pulled in this case, Barry Weiss gets pulled in into this major organization to become their essentially voice. And in general, there's nothing terrible about it from the perspective of creators, independent journalists, independent artists getting the attention of major corporations and becoming part of them. That's something, again, I've advocated a lot in my content, that I like when creators find their way to partner and work with bigger brands, becoming kind of like their voice. The thing is that when it comes to specifically independent journalism, it reminds me of something. Do you remember this episode? It's been a while. It's actually, when I looked it up, I think it's been almost like 15 years, 14 years. It's crazy. But this is one of the great episodes of the first season of Black Mirror. I think it was called 15 Million Favors on 15 Million something. The whole idea of that episode, if you don't recall it, was the fact that you had a bunch of people riding kind of like Peloton-like bikes, consuming content, and that was part of their job. They were kind of like, being part of the hamsters in a hamster wheel, essentially, generating value for those specific companies and generating power and energy. So there was like, again, it was pretty thick plot, but the main point I want to bring it up to this, the whole point is that this main character, played by Daniel Kaluuya, he saw through that system and he decided to become independent. And he basically went and he threatened that he's going to kill himself. That's kind of like what you see in this specific image. And that drove the attention of the crowds because they were all felt like they were part of this system. The system was taking advantage of them. And here's this individual. He's essentially now independent. He's exuding so much power. We want to follow him. And the big corporation in that episode recognized that, hey, he has the attention and that crowd listens to them. And not only do they listen to them, they put in more effort and they essentially generate more quote unquote value for our corporation when they see him and when they follow his guidance versus some stock images, stock videos, or some other, crap that they were putting in front of those individuals on the bikes. And so what happens? He's offered the choice. He's offered the choice of like, hey, you can be this independent. You can potentially try to fight us. Oh, why won't you come join us? And we're going to give you this penthouse. We will give you access to a lot of these resources. You're going to enjoy. Your life will be better. But just keep having that same talk of how you're this misunderstood and you're this independent, now ambitious individual who's breaking the system. And spoiler alert, he took the latter. He went and he agreed to get in bed with this corporation. He essentially decided that he's going to go and continue to promote that message, but he's going to do it in the name of this corporation. How is this all tied in together? Well, this is my concern, that the celebration of a lot of these journalists and independent voices going independent, taking advantage of the creator economy tools, getting in front of millions of people, and essentially becoming very influential personas in this creator economy, world economy, right? Depending on the scale you want to take. This is awesome. But the challenge that I have when I start seeing some of those independent voices being too closely associated with other bigger brands, because that's what it reminds me of. It reminds me of this episode where, hey, they're independent for the sake of the message and for the sake of driving the attention of those individuals, not in actual for the sake of like the value that they're trying to deliver, if it makes sense, right? They just now becoming more efficient way to communicate the idea that corporation, that individual, that maybe political figure wants to put out there. And this is what gives me kind of like this moment of pause and reflection on the fact that as much as I love seeing so many of these journalists and the creators going independent, amassing these millions of people who are now listening to them, we have to be a lot more careful about understanding their motivations, understanding where they're coming from, understanding the people and individuals and the forces behind them, because that's important for us for the context of why they're delivering certain message, right? This is the kind of thing that we've got better at, I feel like, as an audience. There's this whole kind of like conversation about how, oh, the attention span is shortened right now. Right now, no, it's all BS. I actually think the BS meter for the audiences is much better. Like, I fully subscribe to that theory, is that it's not that our attention spans is lower, it's just because as we saw this increase in the amount of content that's fighting for our attention as a viewer, we got much better at quickly differentiating good content versus bad content, fitting content versus, content that we're no longer going to follow. Again, example being, you have all these like AI generated videos that supposedly should be driving our attention and people hate those, versus a well told story in the short form and the long form that can be very slow paced will attract as much or even more attention than what they would have expected from this like carefully architected piece of content that's supposed to be like perfect retention tool. The reason being is because, again, our BS detectors are so much better, and so we understand when something is not right when it comes to the content that we're consuming. That works in general well, up until the point you face this kind of situation where you have a creator who knows how to talk to their audience, who knows how to deliver message in a way that's going to resonate with them, who has the prior existing parasocial relationship with that audience, and that audience will likely to believe them independently of what kind of information they're sharing. They have higher chances of influencing someone and someone not questioning why they're telling them a certain type of story, versus the situations where it's someone new you come across for the first time. You start looking into their profile and you're like, I'm not really sure. It sounds like they're, again, supported by this particular individual, party, corporation, political figure, and this is why they're telling certain things. I'm not going to take their word for it, right? We're gonna question those who are unlikely to question some of those creators who we followed for years potentially. Where I'm getting with all of this is that we are entering the era where fake news are no longer limited to the regular kind of like mass media, your CNNs, your Fox News, your MSNBCs, and there's a lot of like understanding about which party they lean towards, right? Like what kind of news articles they're likely to support and what kind of content they're likely to produce. That entire world was not there because of those media. It was because that's a human nature. Again, when you have the eyeballs and the attention of the audience, there will be forces behind you fighting to get their message through to that audience through you and lean you in one direction versus the other. And so now that entire wave of independent journalists, independent creators who amassed all of this experience in how to communicate with the viewer are now also being kind of like the next level of battlefield of all of those politicians, corporations trying to find individuals to communicate their ideas through. So this is why it's important for you to have an increased BS meter when it comes to the kind of content you're consuming, even if it's coming from your favorite creator. And don't get me wrong, we're not on our own in this battle. As this article kind of like states, I think there's a lot of potential for AI finally becoming useful in the sense of actually helping to do better fact checking of the content that we're consuming, right? There's already websites out there that can tell you, hey, these news articles on News Edition lean this way versus the other way. This is all good, but I feel like we need that next level now of the content analysis in terms of just understanding, hey, who is a particular creator, this particular news edition, this Beehive, Substack article that I'm subscribed to, like, who are the voices behind them, who are trying to communicate certain ideas through them, and are they truly independent? This is something imperative for us to understand, because as you consume more content, as you're exposed to these kind of like articles, especially if they're touching certain, like highly debated, highly potentially provocative news lines, right? Gun rights, pro-life rights, things of that nature, right? Like some political, maybe some war somewhere. Those kind of subjects will always be heavily influenced by different parties through different creators, and you almost like find this bifurcation of the messaging. You have to find ways to understand it, at least find a couple of creators you trust. And my hope is that as the technologies evolve, we're going to see a couple of these additional solutions that will allow us to learn, thanks to like analysis that a large LLM model can produce, who and how is supporting some of those voices that we're listening to. And in the meantime, for yourself, especially if you're a creator, what you can do is that be more thoughtful about how and what you communicate. Because again, the fact that you have the attention, you have one of the most expensive and valuable currencies right now that's available to anyone and everyone, and you happen to amass a lot of it. So you have to be very thoughtful and careful with what you say and how you say it and when you say it. And for us as a viewer, again, we have to be just very thoughtful, and we have to turn on our critical thinking to 11 when it comes to consuming content through some of these creators, no matter how big they are, no matter what kind of positivity they present themselves through, no matter what kind of background they had before, right? They could have been like angels sent on earth in their past 10 years. But the reason why I started the conversation with the numbers that they're making, the moment you start talking about hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars made through content, you enter the situation where that's an easy lever to pull against you. You as a creator, when you make so much money, when you now have people depending on you, you have families depending on you, you have other employees depending on you, you are now motivated to retain that level of earnings. And individuals who will try to influence you to message certain things in a certain way, this is one of the best levers for them to pull, to try and threaten your ability to make money in return for the right messaging that they want you to deliver. And so this is kind of like this interesting conundrum that you discover yourself in, where as those independent voices become more influential, they have opportunity to make more money. And as they make more money, they are much easier to manipulate, to be forced to deliver certain type of message, or at least not to speak on certain topics in fear of losing access to those potential sources of revenue. Like, it's a very tough thing. Trust me, it's a problem as old as the world. Journalists for decades, hundreds of years, have been in the same kind of situation. When you become influential, you become interesting to certain parties who want to communicate the message, and they're going to do anything that they can to force you to deliver the message that they want you to share. And in creator economy, nothing is different. It's all the same. It just happens to be that we get to have access to make more money through our independence, but our independence will be always challenged, and it's something for us to consider as creators as we become big players and the kind of content we cover. And it's also an important factor for us as a viewer to keep our critical thinking on at all times, because no matter who you're listening to, no matter how big of a creator you follow, at one point or another, they will become those interesting parties for those individuals, corporations, politicians to influence, to say the right thing to you. So if you're not really kind of like yet sold on this idea, go rewatch that episode. Again, it's 15 million of something. I'm forgetting, on Netflix. Check it out. You'll see what I'm saying. This is the exact example of what I think we're facing, which is kind of interesting to see, like 12 years, 13 years later, that how much of a like prediction, correct prediction that episode was. It just, you have to, I think, to look at it from the perspective of today. And yeah, let me know in the comment section below what you think. If you have certain creators that you really trust and you feel like you've done your due diligence and you can trust their word and they're really independent, it doesn't matter left-leaning, right-leaning, center-leaning. I think the truth seekers should always be prevailed, because they have the hardest job. They have the hardest job of maintaining that independence. And I'm curious to hear who are those individuals who you respect out there. And yeah, if you have any other thoughts, dump them in the same comment section, and I'll see you next Saturday. Peace.